Hi, Kiera. How are you?
Good. Good morning, Hem. How are you?
Good morning. So nice to see you. Welcome to our One Humanity Community podcast. This podcast especially features nature lover, ecologist, and farmer, many people who want to do something good for Mother Earth.
I love it. Thank you for having me.
You are the founder of CEI, the Community Ecology Institute. Why did you found CEI?
Okay, that's a good question. It's a big question. I should work on having a shorter answer, but I think at the heart of it for me is that as a child, I had a very meaningful personal relationship with nature up until I was in fourth grade. We moved every year for a variety of reasons. So homes changed, schools changed, friends changed, but what didn't change is that outside whatever door I was, whatever home I was living in, there were, trees and the sky and some kind of nature to engage with. And my parents really encouraged it. I don't think it's as common today for kids to just go out and play, but I was at I think the tail end of the generation when that was pretty normal. And so I did. And so for as long as I can remember, nature has been a companion to me. And so that led to kind of being involved in environmental activities for as long as I can remember, but it really shifted into like activism and academia when I got to college. So all of my degrees were in environmental fields. I think, again, for that reason of it being something I personally deeply cared about, and I could see the issues at hand within my own community. And then, speaking about promote, when I had kids, I'd been working as an environmental consultant for a long time, but I was commuting to DC and then working in a high rise. And it was very good work environmentally, but it was very disconnected from being ever in nature and ever being barefoot or growing anything. So I didn't want to have a career that really had me being disconnected from my children. I was, long commutes and being really disconnected from nature. So I thought it was a time to really strive for something transformative in terms of my vocation. I went back to school and met Promote in the Prescott College Ph.D. in sustainability education. And there I learned about 3 significant life experiences that are really essential for people to take action on behalf of Mother Earth and its time in nature as a child, ideally, right? So it really rang true for my lived experiences, getting people outside, having it be personal and not just academic or theoretical, but that personal relationship with nature as much as possible, as young as possible, having mentors that show that nature is something to be cared for. Let's grow a garden, let's pick up that piece of trash, this is what this tree is called. And then giving people a chance to make a difference, that if you can offer those 3 life experiences, you're creating the conditions for people to care about the environment. And in whatever way that shows up, they don't have to be an environmental professional, but they might make the choice to turn off the lights or recycle or to eat a plant-based diet. So my whole life work has really been organized around those 3 concepts. And the Community Ecology Institute was created specifically to take that research and bring it into the community in many different ways as we can. So all of our programs do those 3 things. And it's been really amazing to see that people have responded very well. I didn't know if anybody would show up to our first program when we were trying to offer those experiences to families through our Families in Nature program, but they did. So it's been a success.
What a wonderful response. When I reflect back on my childhood, some of the core values never changed. When I was 4 or 5-year-old, I used to bring some plant from jungle, I used to plant them around my house. I just made a jungle.
Yeah.
So it never changed. Still now, I love plant and nature and all these things. Can you please tell me a little bit more about CEI? Your programs are wonderful. In many ways, they connect to my passion.
Yes.
So please share a little bit more about it. And also, if you want, please include mission and vision of CEI or your personal mission and vision.
So the mission of the Community Ecology Institute is to cultivate communities where people and nature thrive together. So, the first thing in doing that is getting people outside into nature. We can't thrive together if we're disconnected, and really people are not separate from nature. We are nature, but that's not the way as we are commonly perceived. Most people don't see that. So really trying to build that sense of people being a part of nature by having people be in nature. So that is our mission. We have a beautiful vision statement. I don't know if I can say it off the top of my head, but I have our annual report right here. So bear I probably should be able to articulate the
You
vision.
don't have to be exactly right, whatever is there, but
Um,
maybe if you want to just summarize.
Well, our work is really our work. What we're trying to do is we're trying to take what the research tells us are best practices and put it in the ground here and to create tangible community level change at the intersections of environment, education, equity, and health. So we have, it's interesting, we're currently debating the number of programs we have, but really the way we've been talking about is 4 core experiential education programs, and we're intentionally intergenerational. We want people to be able to find a place with us, whether they're a parent with a 1-year-old or if they're 89 and everything in between. So our first program was the Families in Nature program. That was my doctoral research. That's now in its 8th or 9th year. It's really caregivers and their preschoolers, elementary schoolers, primarily that age, having fun educational experiences that build family relationships and connection to nature. And then our next program was the Roots and Wings Learning Community. I was really interested in what an ideal educational environment would be, having finished my doctorate in education. I think public education is essential. It's a public good, just like libraries and hospitals. And I think if we were to create an education system right now, knowing what we know now as opposed to what we knew in the 1800s, it would look very different. And so Roots and Wings is a co-op that serves elementary and middle school age kids. It's really meant to be nature-based, project-based, community-based, collaborative learning. So that is about to serve 100 students. In our fall, we had 85 students complete that program. It's a school year-long co-op, 85 this past year, and it'll be 100 this upcoming year. And then we started an internship program called Green Seeds in response to COVID. Our high school and college students were dealing with this very difficult, isolating, virtual learning reality, and so the internship program gives them the chance to feel connected in a part of a community and have experiential learning here at Freetown Farm. So that started in 2020. So we have now graduated, I was doing the math last night, 89 students from our internship program. So for at least a season of being with us. And so that's really focused on regenerative agriculture primarily, but it is somewhat student passion led in terms of what they might want to learn that intersects with our mission. And then our newest program is Nourishing Gardens that started in 2021, and that's about transforming lawns into ecological food growing gardens. So we're really focused on installations at schools and other public spaces, especially Title I schools, those where there's a lot of students who are dealing with food insecurity, so they can see where their food is growing. These gardens aren't certainly large enough to provide substantial food to the school, but it provides an opportunity for students to feel empowered that they know that food can be grown and how they might do it, and they can pull a carrot out of the ground and have that kind of moment of awe and connection around food. And then everything that we do here at Freetown Farm really is a program unto itself. We have right now at the moment a produce sale going on at the top of the property where we are selling the produce that we have grown here to our community members. And so there's just this whole arc of regenerative agriculture and food sovereignty that we're working on as farm owners. We purchased this farm in 2019 as the last working farm in our town to protect it from development and make it an experiential education space. And then the most recently, well, 2 other things. We had 950 different people volunteer here at the farm, Freetown Farm, last year. So volunteerism is really kind of a program unto itself. People come to learn through service. And there's just an incredible community of volunteers. And then last year, on the winter solstice in December, we purchased the Green Farmacy Garden, which is an incredible space about 4 miles away. That's really an ethnobotanical sanctuary. And so we're learning about that land and about the plants and the other natural elements and cycles of that space and protecting it so that it can be available to the community. So there's a lot, but it all cycles around this reciprocal relationship, ideally a reciprocal relationship between people and nature. And the fact that firmly believe that transformation occurs through experiential learning.
One thing is that the doctoral dissertation or doctoral research, so what you did is you are practicing it. That's in my case also, I'm trying to do what I did in my doctoral research in real life. When I was taking doctoral classes, I told my supervisor, I don't want to do research that goes and just sits somewhere in the cell. I want to do something in real life. And I'm glad to hear from you. You are practicing it, not only preaching it. So that's another thing is
that's where the magic happens, right? It's like you learn something so deeply and then to find a way to bring it into practices.
Yes, I knew about you and your the action you are taking, program you are offering, I always think like, how about if there are many here, if there are many people like you, like what maybe perhaps our community, our globe, maybe our planet would be a better place. I think we need more people like you, Chiara. That's what
and like you, and how do we do that? I think that's one of the big questions, is how do we help people? There's so many brilliant, passionate people with beautiful ideas, and there's a lot of barriers to overcoming them. And I think a lot about how is it that I was able to bring this forward, and I am starting to get my ideas together about like, how did this actually work, and I think there's an important story to tell, but I truly believe that every community should have something like this. It doesn't have to be called the Community Ecology Institute, whatever's appropriate for that space and those people, but how much better would the world be if every neighborhood, every community had a not just green space, maybe this is derailing the podcast, but green space is great. Howard County, where I live, has a lot of beautiful green space, but maybe nobody's there. Maybe somebody's just walking their dog, or maybe somebody's just at the playground. There's not a community that comes with the green space. And I think that's what's so important, is that people are showing up today maybe to buy some tomatoes, but they're welcomed. They're asked their name. They know if they come back next week, somebody's be like, oh, I remember you. Welcome again. Tell me more about you. And there really is a sense of connection. And that is so important from a mental health perspective, from a community problem solving perspective. And so, how do we turn, bare minimum, every community needs green space that feels safe and accessible, but then for that green space to be community building as well, I think is where it's been so impactful here, because it's all the community partners and all the community members that make what we're doing very special. You can't do it alone. So I think about that a lot, because I deeply want everybody to have access to something that's this way.
Wonderful. See, I became a steward of Green Farmacy Garden.
Yeah.
I had communicated with the owner previously. That's why I feel a kind of spiritual sort of connection. And when you were in the process, I was checking like news, oh, okay, perhaps, CEI could get it. It would be really great. And when I heard the news that CEI became the steward, I was really happy, because I think it's in the right hand, right? It will get right. It would get right plan, I thought. And I believe that since it has a historical value, historical significance, what type of plan you have, how you are thinking to make good use of Green Pharmacy Garden.
So the Green Pharmacy Garden, it's very interesting. The Freetown Farm property is just over 6 acres, was owned by the previous owner, an organic farmer, for 40 years. The Green Pharmacy Garden, just over 6 acres, was owned by the previous owner for just over 40 years. So there's these interesting parallels in terms of sort of the shape and history of these two different properties that we now find ourselves stewarding. Certainly both, were the native homelands of the Piscataway-Conway tribe, because they're very close together in terms of geography. The Green Pharmacy Garden is so unique, though, where the farm feels like a hive of activity. If you go outside right now, there's probably 80 or 90 people here doing different things in different gardens. It has a very kind of like up energy. The Green Pharmacy Garden is a seed sanctuary and a plant sanctuary, and it feels very much like a sanctuary. You arrive and it's a calm energy. It's maybe a little bit more of an introspective, meditative energy over there. So they're very complementary, kind of balanced properties, I think, for us to steward, and thinking through which programs maybe have a natural fit at different properties at different times. But the Jim and Peggy Duke, who created the Green Pharmacy Garden, Jim Duke was an ethnobotanist, traveled the world learning about how different cultures use plants for medicinal purposes. And his wife is a botanical illustrator, and they created this book called The Green Pharmacy Garden that was a bestseller in 1997. And then they basically transformed their property in Fulton, Maryland, to be a Green Pharmacy Gardens. There's these terrace garden beds that have over 300 different species of plants that have documented, researched, culturally relevant medicinal purposes. So it's this incredible place. It's been doing its thing for a while, publicly through the Dukes. They used to have different walks and talks and kind of this really nice intersection between science and the arts over there. And then the Maryland University of Integrated Health acquired it as the Dukes were coming into their senior years. They had a kind of a land transfer agreement, and then Peggy Duke passed in 2021. At that time, Maryland University of Integrated Health physically owned the property, although she still lived there. But due to COVID, their educational programs had gone virtual, and they have one of the foremost programs in herbal medicine. So this was sort of like a annex teaching garden in addition to their own campus. And so it didn't really, with the virtual, student body, didn't really make a lot of sense for them. So we've inherited this property with so much history. We have an advisory council, including the Duke's daughter, including people who have traveled the world with them, a great group of people who knew the Dukes personally and professionally, helping us shape the path forward in a way that sort of is responsive to the challenges and opportunities of 2023 and still honors that legacy. So the gardens are being maintained. There's 3 gardeners that were there when the Dukes were alive. They're still there. They know the gardens very well. They're caring for them. We have the advisory committee, the types of community events that have been there historically, monthly introductions to herbal medicine, monthly foraging walks, monthly volunteer opportunities, some eco-social game nights and tea gatherings. Those are all still happening. So this year, our commitment is just to listen and learn and observe and understand what it is that we're stewarding fully through a full cycle of the year. As permaculture suggests, don't do anything for a year once you have land. And then we'll start to make more specific plans. I do know, there are streams in the woods there that are a bit eroded. What can we do to restore stream health? How could we bring in some more native species into the woods? There's certainly things that we would like to do. There are things that we will need to do from like a very practical perspective, like zoning. I mean, we're now a nonprofit. It's different than an individual residence. What sort of zoning do we need in order to maybe enhance the types of community programs that are offered there? So it's quite a big gift to hold the responsibility for. And we're trying to step into it very mindfully and not make any sudden moves, and make sure we honor that history, but make it really relevant. And also, as a nonprofit, it has to pay for itself. We have to figure out pathways for it to cover the costs, right? So we're trying to figure those out too. And maybe that's retreats. Maybe that's workshops, man. There's a lot that could be possible there.
Sounds a good plan, Chiara. And also, indeed, you are right. It's a gift. I really believe that it's a gift, and we have to walk mindfully.
Yes.
In such a auspicious place for me. I when I read about it, and I find that way. And I talk about this with my friend. One of my friend has a 150-acre farm in Middletown, Maryland. And we planted about 1,000 fruit trees there. He wants to create a kind of food forest.
Yes.
So, I am just helping, in my family, entire family was helping there. How were you when you were growing up, and what are, if you want to share some of your passion, hobbies?
I think it's a really interesting question. I don't know that I've changed that much.
Like me.
In some ways, certainly. I have always been, I think, more introverted. A kid that spends a lot of time alone playing in a stream is, maybe a different kid that's active in a ballet class or something like that. So I think I've always been and still am quite introverted. I love conversations and small groups with people, but I really find my comfort and my recharge gardening, or being just in nature by myself or with a small group of people. So that is still very true. I find myself living a life that is often not very introverted, and so I'm grateful to have places to go to recharge. I have always been, I think I've always carried a pretty strong sense of responsibility. Like, I just feel like if I see something that needs to be done, that I should do my best to do something, right? So I've never been the person to walk by a piece of trash and not pick it up, or to see somebody who is sad and not offer a word. Like, I think I've always maybe been hyper aware of my surroundings and wanted to do something to make a difference. And that can be maybe a bit over the top and draining. I think I historically maybe hold too much responsibility for things that are perhaps only very lightly in my control. but in some ways that served me well because, you know, then I notice and then I show up and maybe my solution is just a drop in the bucket, but it's feeling like there is, I don't know the right way to say it. But yeah, I mean, I've just always had a strong sense of responsibility, and I think that carries forward today. I have a lot of artists in my family. I have vivid memories of being with my grandmother outside, helping her paint. She was very sweet. She was doing a big mural and she was letting me put little stars, you know, on the mural. But I've always had a real leaning towards the arts in different ways. Now that shows up, I like to take a basket with me out on walks and gather pine cones or fallen flower petals or whatever it might be, or broken glass, and make art out of whatever I happen to find, wherever I happen to be. And so I still turn to art as a form of therapy and comfort and joy. So I think those three things carry true. Like I very much, you know, you'd find me with an apple and a book under a tree, right? And I think I'd still, if you asked me what my perfect day was, I'd say I want an apple and a book under a tree. Maybe I want a hammock and some cheese to go with that apple, but you know, it's maybe evolved a little bit, but that's still pretty much my perfect day. So yeah, like you said, those early roots are our roots, you know. So
That's good to know that how your personality or how your some basic norms, values from your childhood, how they are shaping you, what you are doing now.
Yeah.
So can you please share some of your biggest successes, maybe challenges if you want to include both? Yeah.
I talk a lot about challenge and opportunity being the same side of a coin. You know, there's challenge and opportunity go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I feel very goes back to what I was saying earlier. And when I did my very first event, you know, as I created this program to create those 3 life experiences, I didn't know if anybody was going to show up. I did my very best. You know, I certainly didn't throw it to chance. I advertised and I did everything I could learn to do to try to create the conditions for it to be good. But then you sort of have to take a leap of faith and just show up and do the thing and know that whoever shows up is the right people at that time. And a lot of people showed up and a lot of people kept showing up. And so I really attribute my success to somehow finding the sweet spot between what I feel called to create and what I know to be of value based on, you know, academia, et cetera, that people are responding well to it and showing up. Because if nobody showed up, it wouldn't be a success. The success is entirely, or at least, I don't know, largely in the fact that people choose to participate. You know, if I did everything that I did and nobody chose to participate, then I still would have been a good effort, you know, good try, but it wouldn't be successful. So that's really remarkable. And I think there's probably a lot to unpack about why people show up. But again and again, that's true. The farm has been successful because people have shown up to help steward it. I certainly couldn't do it myself. Where I think I maybe bring important value to the Community Ecology Institute that's maybe uniquely a skill set I have at this time. I'm trying to grow it across my team is because I was a consultant for so long. I learned how to write in the consulting world's RFPs, requests for proposals, where somebody says, we want to hire a consultant. You know, the government will say, we want to hire a consultant to do this piece of work. And that's a really rigorous, I will never forget how rigorous that process is within the consulting world of responding to those RFPs. It's really the same thing for grants. And so I think that professional experience positioned me very well for me to say, here's a grantor who has and wants to give money for these things and how to write a very responsive response. You know, I know that's duplicative, but if I found in my past world that if you missed one question, or if it's a 10-part question and you forgot one of 10 parts, that they just might take you out of the stack for consideration. So I really appreciate how much I learned as a consultant that is really relevant to leading a nonprofit, especially around the grant writing. It's just really a skill set. And so I've got this own like grant writing workshop that I lead for my staff. And I think it's really important that we all have those abilities here. But it's something that can be both taught and learned. but who teaches and learns that? I mean, there's more and more. I think Maryland Nonprofits is teaching grant writing workshops, but I'm really appreciative of that skill set. Fundraising more largely feels outside of my comfort zone. So that's a big area of growth for me. I didn't go to school for nonprofit management. I didn't go to school to be a development director, right? But so writing grants is one thing, developing programs that have a revenue model with them is another thing. Like Roots and Wings is totally revenue. It has its own revenue built in through tuition. All of our programs, for the most part, have multiple revenue streams, right? So I can do all that work. And again, that goes back to consulting. You got a budget, you got to work with your budget. But going to somebody and saying, dear Hem, you believe in our work, would you become a monthly donor, right? That feels very, for as much as I deeply believe in the work we're doing, that's still uncomfortable for me. And so thinking about how to do those asks that are not about like a fee for service, or not like, hey, I have money, what could you do with my money to achieve my goals? That's a big learning curve, I think, for a lot of people, very outside the comfort zone for a lot of people. So I think those are, some of what I attribute this success to is we have been very fortunate around grants. And again, I think it's because there is a bit of an art and a science to it. And I have the opportunity to have known that. And I will also say, one of the things, if I ever get to write a book about what I have been able to co-create here, we started with social capital. And I think that would be the biggest thing I could say to anybody is, before you get your 501c3 nonprofit status, before you go to try to create something new based on what your idea is like show up in your community and figure out who's already doing what in your community and how you can help. I served on multiple nonprofit boards before I started in a nonprofit of my own and volunteered in a lot of different ways with different community groups. And so I had given sort of freely of my time. Somebody said time, talent, and treasure, right? Like I had been giving my time, talent, and treasure to a lot of other organizations. And then when I found a niche that was sort of like the thing I could uniquely contribute, there were people who were like, oh, you've been so helpful, I'll be happy to help you, right? So I think it's that social capital of giving, knowing your community, giving in your community, that can then help when you find your particular passion project, your particular sweet spot, and then want people to lend a hand, offer some guidance, right? I think if you just show up and say, this is a very common thing in the environmental space. It's like, we are here, we're going to build you a well, this is what we've decided you need. Like nobody wants that, and it doesn't last. But if you are truly a part of the community and have offered yourself freely as a, servant learning, right? Like servant leadership, those kind of ideas. I did that for a long time before I started this. And so I had social capital. And I think that's been really, really important because the farm sort of came to us, right? Like I actually was not looking for a farm whatsoever, but somebody sent an email saying, I hear you'd like to have a farm. I did, as a human being, want to have a farm, right? I lived in one when I was in first grade, but it was because I was a part of a community that people had seen and heard kind of what I was doing, what I cared about, my interests. And so it was really, I think when you show up that way, then things can show up. And it's that reciprocal thing. Because I wasn't out calling realtors saying, hey, could you help me find a farm for my little nonprofit? It, like literally came. And then I had to go out to say, everybody, like, hey, everybody, if you've enjoyed the last 4 years of free programming that we've been offering, could you help us with a $50 contribution to buy a farm, right? But there was a universe of people who might be receptive to that, right? So I think that's really, really important. It's probably my biggest piece of advice.
Wonderful. The giving, the way you gave for many, many years. And I think it came back in indirect form, I guess. Yeah. So that is the key, I guess. And now we are moving to kind of bigger question.
Okay.
But I just wanted to know your opinion in terms of as a humanity. I call it this podcast, One Humanity Podcast for Mother Earth. So what, in your opinion, what do you think, what are the big challenges since we share the Mother Earth?
Yeah.
What do you think, Chiara? What are our challenges and what action, maybe that could be the next question, but just I'm asking now on what action we must take as one humanity.
So when I was starting the nonprofit, I used a lot in my grants a quote from Gina McCarthy, who was the head of the Environmental Protection Agency at the time. And she said, we have two great challenges. One is climate change, and the other is people's disconnection from nature. And then she went on to talk about why those two and how they're connected. And, you know, the human disconnect from nature is so important, because if we're disconnected from nature, then all the other challenges basically flow out from this idea of the fact that we're disconnected from nature. Nature is ours to take and ours to use. There's no inherent livelihood or justice for the trees or for the waters, that it's really strictly there for our consumption, and somehow we will technologically resolve any problems that we create, right, with our superior status. So I believe that to be very true. And so that's kind of why connection to nature is the heart of our work. I think if people actually feel a kinship and an embeddedness in the natural world, they will change their behavior, right? So I think that is essential. I think that's increasingly problematic as people just dive deeper and deeper and deeper into social media and lead, especially with COVID, like we were forced to lead isolated virtual world. In an isolated virtual world, I think a lot of people actually turned to nature as comfort and solace, and maybe started walking through a park that they hadn't walked through before, because what else could you do? But I think that's an increasing challenge, is this disconnect from nature. And then climate change. I was working on my master's degree in 2001 through 2003. At that time in my climate modeling class, right, it's an environmental science engineering degree. We did climate modeling. It was projecting at like 2100. We might to see more peak and flashy weather. We might see these curves in terms of heat if we didn't change our ways, right? By the time I had my first kid in 2009, it was here. So we're like 80 years ahead of where I thought we would be in like 2000, right? So I think we've missed the moment, to be honest. There's that quote, like, we're the first generation that's experiencing climate change and the last generation that can do anything about it. Unless there's something really incredible, like, you know, really massive carbon sequestration at a military sort of response level, unless the global governments activate like they would if it was like a World War III to bring carbon. I mean, the technology exists, right? But like we would have to build huge plants to be sequestering carbon, to do some solar reflection. I don't even know what we would need to do to buy us more time to get it together in terms of other behaviors. But I think we are now in a time of, it was the head of the UN just said that we now entered the era of the global boiling, right? That feels true. It has been the hottest week, hottest month on record, you know, so it feels very here. It feels very critical. I think we are now in an area of like a reckoning, and we'll have to figure out very hyper local, for the average person, for the person who's not the head of the United Nations, for the person who's not the head of a government, we'll have to figure out very local steps towards community resiliency. And I think for the average person, figuring out who your neighbor is, figuring out how you can grow some food together, figuring out how you can plant more trees to try to reduce the impacts of heat, figuring out how you can come together to address our needs to be resilient in the face of climate change is probably our best solution. And I don't think that it has to be all doom and gloom, but I think it's very serious. And I think it is the thing right now, you know, that we should all be focusing on with very clear and strong focus and emphasis, you know. So and they go hand in hand, right? So it's like, you know, if everything that we're doing right here is climate focused, which it is about, you know, growing food together. It's about knowing your neighbor. It's about figuring out how do we make sure that nobody is hungry at the end of the day because of all this instability that's being created. So I think we're in for a very unstable time, and the way we create any kind of stability is very local. Which is that's not good news, but I mean, it's hot. We're closing. So usually we're open till 3. And it's a good example today. Usually we're open till 3:30 on Saturdays. We're closing at noon because it's gonna be 96 degrees with the heat index over 100. It's not safe. So we have to make adjustments. And I think those adjustments are going to become more and more profound, but it's here.
Even small action, small or big, that matters a lot.
Yeah.
So local like-minded people here, we used to protest. I participated every Friday. We call Fire Drill Friday.
Yeah, I did too.
With Zen Fonda. So, you know, the people, how the community was coming together, I was really, really excited. I wanted to do more, you know, similar activities. But the work you are doing also, this also matters a lot. in terms of both issue you mentioned, climate change and the how people are kind of the division between people and nature. So you are trying to address both challenges, Kiera.
Yeah, hyper local, completely global, like, and then I think the question for me, the question is, so you got to figure out for every person, I think the question is, what can I do? And it doesn't make it your fault. And I think that's really important. 100 companies are responsible for 70% of global carbon emissions, right? So it's not your fault. It's not my fault. It's not anybody's fault that's here. Yeah. And also that doesn't mean that we get to put our heads in the sand and just carry on as is. I think that's not going to be good for anybody's health, mentally or physically. And so I think the question is, okay, so what can I do? I can support my local farmer, because that reduces food miles, and just from a question of like, what's the kind of world that we want to live in, and if this is going to push us to make changes, is there a way for it to push us to make changes that actually feels like within the constraints that we have, like a beautiful, abundant, healthy shift. I was kind of hoping that COVID would force some of those changes, and I don't think it has at all, actually, which is disappointing. But for a minute there, I was like, okay, this is a reckoning, and we're going to change our ways a little bit. And people, maybe grew tomatoes and started sourdough bread, but I don't think it's led to any, wholesale cultural changes. But maybe it did push an awareness of how connected we are as a global citizenry to, one humanity. It is. We are all in this together, and maybe there's some hope there.
Yeah, very nicely said. Very well said, Kiera. Very well said. Because the people in the in the Himalayas of Nepal, how the glaciers are melting, I don't want to go in detail now, but situation is so bad. Even the Mount Everest, how many people, I think you may have heard the news, many people lose their life because of glaciers melting, and also water crisis. And it has some of the stream, let's say, small river are drying up. So it's a big challenge. Even though the local people are not doing much harm to the mother Earth, they are doing everything possible, whatever way.
And the people who are going to be hit the hardest are the people who are causing the least harm, right? And I think that's really devastating, actually.
Yeah. So that's why one humanity community, at least it might, in some ways, hearing or sharing each other's story might be, to some extent, could be helpful. Maybe our conversation, somebody listening from Nepal, from India, from somewhere, from Africa. So anyway, Kira, can you please share who are your 3 most influential people, if you have any? Maybe many, more than 3, but
many.
Yeah. If you understand.
So I think I mentioned, I think a real question, I could answer that like personally, I could answer that in terms of, people I'm inspired by that I've never met before.
Either way, whatever way you want.
You mentioned Fire Drill Fridays. From a climate perspective, I think Greta Thunberg is the voice we need. I love the fact that she just says exactly what's true with no self-censorship about whether or not it's gonna, piss off powerful people. Powerful people should be pissed off. They're doing, in large part, the wrong.
Mine too. She's my role model too. Greta.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I took my kids to see her when she was in DC. I would follow her pretty much wherever. I will say I'm really inspired in the way that I'm trying to lead this work here. Not by the people who started permaculture design. I think there's a lot of problematic facets to that, but I think the ethics and the principles of permaculture inspire my work a lot. So it's a kind of like as a movement. But then Robin Wall Kimmerer, she's an author. She's a Native American botanist and professor, author. Her books have really inspired me, the way she talks about kinship with nature. I love, and she's a poet, so the way that she can both scientifically and poetically, through this really important lens of Native American knowledge and wisdom, talk about this kinship. It's really framed my relationship with nature. Actually, it sort of resonated with what I had always felt, but I didn't really have words for. So she's put words to a lot of things that felt true for me. So I reference braiding sweetgrass like all the time. And I really do think a large part of what creates strength is the act of braiding. Can we braid these things together so we don't just have these strands that we're coming together to make something that's stronger and connected. So I love her work. And then on a more personal level, there was an individual who was very, very important in my life. In high school, he was a very staunch environmental activist, like, don't you dare use a disposable utensil. Like, he was hardcore. I love nature, but he really was instrumental in taking my affinity for nature and turning it into activism and opening my eyes to how important our voices are and behavior change is. And it's one thing to grow some plants, but that's not going to cut it, right? And then he actually passed away my first week at college. And so the loss of his presence and the loss of his ability to continue to do his work in the world really cemented me on my path towards like a lifelong commitment to environmental work. Of sort of like, all right, Joe, you can't do it anymore, but I'm going to like pick up your hat and putting that on. And this is my life's work. And so I think I would probably be on a different path if it weren't for the presence that he had in my family. He came to us through a really interesting pathway that basically was like an older brother family for me for many years. And I think if that hadn't been true, it would have been it was a fork in the road, right? For him to join our family, and then also for him to be lost so early. It definitely changed my path. And so I'm really appreciative for the fact that we connected in that way. And yeah, I'm gonna do his work, and it's become my work. But there's definitely that some very, very influential years for me there that kind of cemented that for me, when I could have maybe gone very much down the road of art or down the road of something else.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the loss, Chiara. And also
Life is
regarding
beautiful, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
regarding Greta, as soon as I learned about Greta and her action, her commitment, her dedication, her sacrifice for Mother Earth, I came home and I told my daughter, older daughter, I have two daughters. I said, look, her name is Samru. Samru, look, come, please watch this, watch this. You are younger than Greta, but still, please come, watch. And we watched. That's how each and every video we found on YouTube and on the internet, So she's really, she inspired me a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think she's the voice we need for sure. And other people need to, if 50% of, there's a tipping point, right? At 50% of humanity, we're with Greta, we are standing up, we are boycotting this, we are, closing this building down. Like, I think we're kind of at that point of the need to take more strong action. And then I also think it's gotten so bad that people are probably now wanting to put their heads in the sand, right? It's like, if you feel like you're out of time, then you're not going to spend the time you have protesting. So I think we're in like kind of precarious times, but she is absolutely the voice that is kind of a lighthouse for me.
Yeah. And yes, I agree, totally agree, Kira, with you. The next question is more, I think, somehow related to Greta. She was also 16 when she started, I think. And what is one piece of advice you would give to someone? Or before that, one piece of advice you give your 16-year-old self, what could that be? And if you want to connect both, giving other 16-year-old people, like teenagers, giving similar type of advice, could be similar or different,
I think that's a very beautiful question. I don't know that I have a very beautiful answer, but I would say it's something along making a commitment to know yourself, right? Because each person is unique. We're all connected, we're all the same, but also, we each have our own roots. You might have 10 willow trees, but each willow tree is its own, and it has its own roots, and there may be a little bit different soil, but I don't know that we are encouraged overtly to know ourselves. I think we are actually encouraged overtly to conform and to be normal and to fit in, and to not necessarily recognize or celebrate or amplify or speak the things that are very kind of just true for me and for you and for each person. And so just kind of that self-studentship, you know, in all the ways, like here are the things that come easy to me and the gifts that I have that I can easily share. Here are the things that feel hard and are going to be areas of growth and challenge. Here are the things that I know trigger my insecurities. And so I can dig a little bit deeper and understand maybe like why and whether or not there's an opportunity to let that go. But I think that self-studentship for a 16-year-old, like at 16, you just want to fit in, right? But like, I think the biggest gift that we have to offer is our non-conforming self, right? But then I think on the other side of that is, and so to know and then to stay true to, right? You can try on different things. Like I went through all sorts of different phases, but to explore and learn. But then once you know what's true for you, stay true to yourself. I think it's very easy. Like I worked in a large consulting firm for 13 years and I don't regret it, but I also went in thinking it was going to be 2 years because I knew working in a corporate high rise with high heels didn't feel true to me. And I stayed for a very long time and I learned a lot, but in some ways that there were other paths that I really wanted to travel. Maybe something beautiful would have opened up if I'd kind of not been like, but I need to have a 401k and I need to make a lot of money and I need to have this success thing. So I think the story that we're kind of told of what success looks like is often a little bit harmful to one's soul. And then the other thing I think is, in being true to yourself, it's not just about us, right? Like if it's all about you, and I think in our culture right now, teenagers get very like, it's all about them and their social media and how they look. And it's very sort of self-absorbed. I think there's an other side of that coin where once you know who you are, share that gift, you know, show up at the animal shelter, show up at the community food bank, show up with your friends to make quilts for the senior center, whatever it might be, but like to actually show up in real life. My 13-year-old about this and my 10-year-old about this all the time. It's like, I fully expect you to have a 3-dimensional life. You may not have a 2-dimensional life. You can go there to like unwind a little bit, but like I fully expect, encourage, demand, require that you have a 3-dimensional life. Because you can like spend all your time in a virtual world. And that's not like an inherent evil or bad, and it's like a part of life now. We're 2-dimensional to each other right now. This is very beautiful, rich conversation, but like you have to go have an in-person conversation and go play a real game and with pieces that you can touch, like this whole sensory human experience of sight and smell and touch. Like, so I think knowing and then giving of oneself and showing up 3-dimensionally in the world in some way, that's how this has come to be. Like I said, there was social capital because it's like, this is what I care about. I want to figure out who is doing work that's similar, who has similar passions. I'm going to be of service to what's occurring. Like I've volunteered for the Sierra Club for a long time. That's 100 years old, right? Like, what do they do? How do they do it? Like, how can I help? And I think that's the question I either say to my children too. I'm like, every day I want to hear the words, how can I help? If you're not every day saying the words out loud, it doesn't always have to be to me, it could be to your sister, to your neighbor, like, how can I help? I think it's a very shallow life if we are not asking how we can help and how we can be of service. And I think that's where most of the beauty and the gifts and the reciprocity that make life in such turbulent and uncertain times really worth living. So okay, so I had a lot to say about that. That's what I have to say about that.
No, it's in fact, I really like the way you put. And young people, please listen to this. You know, even though, like, let's say we are gone after 100 years, this piece of advice, golden piece of advice, I would say, will be still relevant. I think because they are kind of evergreen for me. I feel that way. You know,
Yeah.
and it's across culture, across country, across region. These are kind of written in sort of stone type of advice. Thank you, Chiara. Thank you for this wonderful insight. And now books. Any book you want to recommend, especially for, you know, my particular focus, as you know, Chiara, younger generation. So any 3 books if you want to recommend?
Okay, I have to do this because I have to advocate for myself. I have a book. I have a book. My first ever book is coming out. It'll physically
Oh,
be available in November. It's available. You can order it. You can order it
wow.
now. It's called
Mhm,
Growing an Edible Landscape: How to Transform Your Outdoor Space into a Food Garden. So I think it's
mhm,
really relevant in terms of resilience and health and joy. I co-wrote it with a dear friend of mine named Gary Pilarczyk, who had already written a book,
mhm.
and who didn't want to kind of do it by himself again, and so invited me to partner with him on it. So that was a really amazing experience. I'm
Wow.
proud of it. I think it's going to be really nice. It doesn't and weave in permaculture design concepts and
Mhm.
um so out growing an edible landscape.
Yeah.
I already mentioned braiding sweetgrass. I recommend it to everybody, so I would include that. Um, hmm. There's so many books. I'm like looking to the left and the right because I'm surrounded by books. Like books are my favorite thing. Um, so I'd be remiss, I think, to not mention Richard Louv. He was really an inspiration for me. He wrote a book. He's written many, many books. He is a journalist who became kind of a broader author, but he wrote a book called Last Children in the Woods: Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. I picked it up in an airport when I was flying to Arizona for my doctoral program. And it was similar a little bit to braiding sweetgrass, whereas like he was putting data and research and science to things that felt very true for me. I was like just circling and underlining and starring and marking the pages. I was like, oh yes. I mean, really beautifully documenting the changes, kind of the cultural changes in his book, and with a focus in America, but globally, of kids aren't running outside and playing until dark anymore. We have largely retreated inside. We're largely hyper scheduled with school and work and extracurriculars and screens. And what does it mean to really have stepped even further away from connection to nature? And he coined it nature deficit disorder. Like that, it impacts your eyes, it impacts your mental health, it impacts so much to be leading a screen-based interior life, as opposed to what we have evolved with, which is we have evolved as a part of nature, right? So that book was really transformative for me. And then I went to he with a woman named Cheryl Charles created the Children in Nature Network. And I went to their conference and I learned about the idea of family nature clubs. So that book sort of like just like opened up a whole world of, you can see it in hindsight, right? Like in hindsight, you can be like, oh, this led to this, led to this, led to this, led to this. But certainly reading that book led to many beautiful things that have inspired me. And he's got a book more recently called Vitamin N for Nature, I got really excited because he quoted my doctoral research in there. I was like, yay, I have arrived, So I think all of Richard Louv's work, all of Robin Wall Kimmerer's work, very, very different authors, right? Very different perspectives and writing styles, but they're getting at the same important truth. Yeah.
I would love to read your book, and I would definitely recommend my friend, families, whoever in my network, to read your book and other books also you mentioned. All right. So, for this podcast, Kira, would you like to recommend any people? If you don't have anybody in mind, that's okay. As I shared with you last time, we want to make a kind of community who can share their stories, like your stories, very wonderful stories. Anybody would you like to recommend 2 to 3 people if you have?
Right before I came inside, I was talking to my dear friend. His name is Jonathan McKinney. He is a member of the board of directors here at CEI. He had his book just come out. It's called The Little Black Boy, and it talks about his experience from 12 to 18 growing up in inner city Detroit. And so the book might feel very kind of different than this topic or mission, but Jonathan comes to the organization because he's has been for a long time one of our most active volunteers in the NAACP's Garden Plot, which is a community-supported agriculture plot that supports people of color primarily. And he is deeply, deeply connected to growing food and has brought so many people. I was walking by and he had somebody who had never been here before that he had brought out, and there's all these points of connection, and is a real pollinator in that way, like the way in which he has come from probably like the least natural environment possible in his youth, But then in the story talks about going to visit family in Alabama and going to visit family in New York and these places of seeing his grandma having a garden and, the taste of fresh corn or whatever it might be. It's really interesting, like how those moments in youth then like leap forward decades to being like one of the most active people in getting diverse members of our community out growing and gardening. So I think it'd be really cool to have Jonathan on the podcast. I think he would tell a very different, but also very similar sort of story about, how those formative years can bring us full circle. And he's an advocacy community builder by profession. He's done a lot with like political campaigns and really getting out there and doing very important national advocacy work. So it's kind of a different scale too of the work that he's used to doing is like really bigger regional, national advocacy for equity. And, that ties right into environmental issues because again, the people who have done the least harm in terms of their footprint are having the biggest impacts in terms of environmental justice. So I recommend Jonathan.
Wonderful, wonderful. Please connect
I will.
with me. Where can you find people on you online?
I have a personal website, which is chiaradamore.com. It's really more about my art. I have a lot of art that's up there. Every year I make a calendar of my nature art and cards and stuff, but that's just more about me as a person, things I've written that are, different from CEI. So that's there. It's probably out of date. I probably should give that some attention. But then, my work is all centered on the Community Ecology Institute. So you can get to that at freetownfarm.org. We bought that alias because it's easier to remember, which will direct you to our whole page. And then just, communityecologyinstitute.org. There's really nothing about me there other than like, short bio, but that is my life's work. So all of that is where you can find me most of the time, unless I'm like out with my kids, stomping around. I am here doing this. So
yeah, I know, Chiara, you are very, very busy, and thank you so much for managing your time for this podcast. We call it
it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Ham.
One Humanity Community Podcast. Any final word that I didn't ask you or I forgot to ask you? Anything you want to share?
No, I'm excited to see you in person. I'm excited. Thank you in advance for engaging with our youth in some of these upcoming events that we have. We are really looking to, as I mentioned, engage diverse intergenerational audiences. But right now we have a real focus on trying to be a place of welcome and sanctuary for high school students in particular who are kind of grappling with really weird world. So I'm excited that you're going to come out and join us for some of those conversations. I think that will be great. I'm looking to learning from and with you in person there.
Definitely, Chiara, definitely. But frankly, I'm more inspired by when I talk to people who are half of my age.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
So,
yeah, I'm looking forward to them getting to know you as well.
Yeah.
So, it goes back to that second thing, mentorship is important at all ages. And so I think it'll be great for them to have you in their host of mentors.
It's my privilege and honor to have a deep conversation with you. Let's keep in touch, and I would love to see you in person again.
Feeling is mutual. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.